Hi everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'm super excited because I have an amazing guest joining me on my Instagram channel. It's Dr. Gabor Maté, who is a well-known physician who's been practicing for over 4 decades, and he has a lot of clinical experience in dealing with trauma. So I'm looking forward to this. He's just launched a new groundbreaking book called The Myth of Normal, and I'm looking forward to talking to him about his book and about other stuff that generally about his research over all the decades of actually working with patients. Just a little, and we're actually waiting for him to join us now because I'm waiting for his request, and then that's when I'll bring him on. I want to tell you a little bit about my own experience. Yeah, let's bring him on, and I'll hi Gabor, hi Dr. Maté. Can you hear me?
Hi Anita.
Hi, there you are. How nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm in New York at the beginning of this book tour, which will bring me to LA, where I'll see you in a few days.
Yep, I'm going to see you on Monday. And my entire audience knows who you are because your reputation precedes you. And I just wanted to real quick tell you and my audience of how I was first introduced to your work. So when I was really, really sick, so back in 2005, it was before I had the near-death experience, I was really suffering from very late stage lymphoma, on the verge of dying. And my doctor, my medical doctor, not my oncologist, but the MD, GP, family practitioner, he actually gifted me your book. And he said, he had just discovered it, and he said, I have a feeling you will relate to it. And it was the book, When the Body Says No. And when I saw the title, I was like, yes, I immediately resonated that I knew that the illness I was going through was not a physical illness. I knew it was something to do with my emotions. I knew it was because I was overburdened, overtaxed, unable to say no, and all of these things contributed to my body being ill. And so when I saw your book, it was like, wow, somebody gets it. I started reading it. I didn't have the energy to finish it at that point. And I crossed over. I literally died. And later, and then I experienced this healing. And much later, after my book came out and everything that happened, somebody told me that you had mentioned me on an interview. And that's when I thought, oh my gosh, he mentioned me, because I was a fan of yours, and I thought, this is really great, you mentioned me. So anyway, for me, that's how it started, my relationship into your work. I just wanted to open with that.
Well, that's wonderful. And I just read your book. I didn't know you knew anything about me. But I read your book, and I thought, wow, here's a really articulate and self-discovered or self-transformed example of everything I've ever seen in medicine. So here we are. And then in my new book, of course, in a very important chapter, your story plays a very central role. I hope you found it accurately represented in this book.
Absolutely. I love the way that you write and the way that you represent and the way that you explain things. And so I want to dive into that deeper. But what I want to also ask you is, just in your opinion, from all the work you've done, what I've noticed as well is that even though there is so much modern technology available out there to help us to be super healthy and well, and there's so much awareness, but what it looks like from my perspective is people are just getting sicker and sicker. Do you notice that?
Well, statistically, that is true. There's something like 70% of American adults are at least on one medication. 40% are on at least 2. There's more and more childhood anxiety, depression, ADHD, childhood suicide. There was an article in the New York Times 3 weeks ago about a teenager who was on 10 different psychiatric medications. The life expectancy of Americans is going down over the last couple of years, so that by every indication, society is getting sicker. People are getting sicker.
Yep. I know it's really amazing because I had to go for some checkups and tests and all recently, partly to do with my immigration status here, which has recently changed. And the the doctor who was doing the medical exam, she asked me about, she said, how many prescription meds are you on? And I said, none. And she flipped. She literally flipped. She was like, wow, someone your age, and if you know, in America, you'd be on 10 by now. And
Yeah.
so, and I flipped when she said that. And then she actually said that you are healthier than most people in this country, which surprised me because I still deal with physical issues and physical challenges and things. But by her reckoning, I was healthy because I was not on any prescription meds. I usually go for complementary. So I found that super interesting. And yet another practitioner I was dealing with, because of some issues, she was telling me that at the time when I dealt with cancer, 1 in 7 people had cancer. This was back in 2004, 5, 6. She said today it's 1 in 2.
Yeah.
So, so these statistics actually blow me away. They really do.
And this is in a society with the highest sophistication of medical intervention and technology, you know?
Yes.
You have to wonder what's going on.
And so, in your opinion, what do you feel is going on, like from your experience of the work that you've done?
Well, there's 2 parallel things going on. One is that what is called normal in this society is very unhealthy and unnatural. And disease in this society, rather than being an abnormality, it's a normal response to abnormal circumstances. In other words, the values that we live by and the way we live and the way we raise children, the way we work, the way we relate to each other, they toxify our lives physiologically and mentally, of course. So what we call as normal is completely unhealthy and unnatural. That's one strain. The other strain is going on is, despite the many stories of people like yourself, and despite all the scientific research that shows the indelible unity of mind and body, the average physician is not trained to understand that. So that people go to physicians and nobody will ask them about their traumas, about their stresses, about how they feel about themselves as a human being. And yet these factors, because of the mind-body unity, scientifically demonstrated, these emotional and psychological factors have everything to do why people are sick. Not to mention things like inequality and racism, they make people sick. But the average physician is not trained to understand that. So on the one hand, we get a society that's increasingly stressed and is making people sick. On the other hand, you have a medical profession that's completely incapable of recognizing that.
Yeah. See, you're really speaking my language here. You're speaking to my heart, because I have been through issues of like being completely burned out to the point where my body manifested many physical symptoms, some of which actually scared me. And I went to medical doctors, and literally they do test after test after test, but they're not homing in on what's actually going on. And all they're doing is treating the physical symptoms. That's all they're really doing. And just prescribing more and more drugs, which I don't really like taking.
That's right. So that there's this, it's been called the science practice gap. In other words, there's all that science has told us about how emotions affect our physiology, how our social relationships affect our physiology, how the mind-body is an inseparable unit. So there's the science, tens of thousands of scientific papers published in major journals. And on the other hand, you have the training of physicians that completely ignores all that information.
You know, it's so interesting that even with all the science to back it up, that people still poo-poo this kind of stuff. They still call it woo-woo. And it blows me away, because I even did an interview earlier today where someone was interviewing me, speaking to me about my story, and they wanted to put this story out in a mainstream publication, and they wanted me to explain to them how would I share what happened to me in a way that would convince people who don't believe me. And I said, I'm not trying to convince people who don't believe me. And she said, but everybody who reads this paper is not going to believe you, because no, she didn't say they're not going to believe you. She said everybody who, the kind of demographic who reads this publication does not buy into the kind of thing you talk about. And I said, but the kind of thing I'm talking about is that my body got sick because of things that I was doing to it.
Yeah.
And they don't want to hear that. Immediately they'll say, oh, but you're blaming the victim. And, oh, but you're, but it's not their fault. And I'll say, no, it's not their fault. But only when we take responsibility for our health and our wellness can we actually do something about it.
Yeah. So that's the thing. If I say to a person, you got this disease for no reason we can figure out, and you're just an unfortunate individual struck by bad luck, what would you rather hear that? Or would you rather hear that there's something about the way you lived your life that's not your fault, because it was unconscious, it has to do with your childhood programming and all the stresses that you're under, that if you understand all that, then you can take responsibility and actually help to have some agency in dealing with that process. Which message would people rather hear? That they're passive victims of some misfortune, or that actually there's something about their lives that the disease itself manifests, and if they can address that, they can get some power over the process in their bodies. Now, most people, I think, would rather hear the second message, but unfortunately, they don't hear that message. They hear either it's your fault because you did all these things badly, or they hear, oh, you're just a poor victim of unfortunate fate. Both of which makes them totally passive.
Yeah, exactly. I know. So actually, I'm curious to hear about your book, The Myth of Normal. I love the title. I would love to hear how you came up with it and why you called it that, and what do you mean? What actually is the myth of normal?
Well, I came up with it is I had this book planned for many years with a different title, and I'd given up on it because I thought, I can't do it. It's too big. It's bigger than me. It's just not in me to do it. And I gave the money back to the publisher.
Oh, wow.
And then I was sitting in San Francisco over breakfast with my wife at a hotel, and I was more relaxed. I just had a holiday, so there was more space in my mind. And all of a sudden, my mind just got flooded. The Myth of Normal. And my wife wrote it down. That's the title of my new book. And what I mean by that is that what is normal in this society, what is the norm, is neither healthy or natural. That what we consider to be normal is actually unhealthy and toxic to human beings. Because when you look at human beings, we evolved as very different creatures. We evolved as communal creatures in touch with nature, as part of a small hunter-gatherer band that was totally connected, where children were with their parents the whole day, where young babies were held. They were not allowed to cry. They were not put down to cry themselves to sleep. They were not hit if they misbehaved. They were not excluded from the group, like timeouts, if they had emotions like anger, totally healthy emotions. In other words, how we evolved, and we have studied this, how we evolved, we're communal creatures in contact with one another, with our authentic feelings, and with other people. Now, in terms of authentic feelings, we evolved out there in nature. How long do we survive if we're not in touch with our gut feelings out there in nature? Not very long. So we evolved creatures in touch with ourselves and in communal contact with others. Now, how we live today is we get disconnected from our bodies by all kinds of parenting practices, just like you disconnected from your body at a certain point. And we get disconnected from other people. We put on this false persona. We pretend to be somebody that we're not. So even when people are friendly to us, they don't know who we are because we're afraid to manifest who we are.
Yep.
all this leads to pathology of mind and body. And then sometimes people have this disease to wake them up, you know, and I don't recommend that way of waking up, but
No.
that's what tends to happen to a lot of people. But the point is that the culture is toxic because it forces us to live in ways that are completely unnatural for you. And I don't just mean physically unnatural, I mean mostly emotionally unnatural.
Yeah, I so agree with you. And there's a couple of things here that I really want to unpack or dive into. One is, I know you've mentioned that women are more prone to chronic disease
Yeah.
than men. And the second thing I wanted to just say this so that I don't forget is that, you know, you've spoken about my story and about my healing. And I wanted you to know, and even the listeners, that for me to stay healthy, I consciously have to be aware of the tendencies that I have, the emotional tendencies that I have, which can bring me back down that spiral of illness. It's because of the experience I had and because of everything I went through. I understand it now. I understand my patterns. I understand what I have a tendency to do. I understand that I have like a very strong people pleasing, or I'm very non-confrontational, and so confrontation stresses me out. And I have to watch all the things that stress me out so that it doesn't, so that things don't accumulate that weigh down on my body and burn me out and so on, because I don't want to go down that spiral of disease again. So basically, but I also have to be careful not to live from a place of fear of disease. So there's a lot that goes on in my head, but I know that you understand what it is I'm saying exactly. So I wanted to take a deeper dive into that, and also why you believe women are more prone to chronic disease.
So when you look at the statistics, this is incredible, but something like out of 100 people with autoimmune disease, like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, colitis, Crohn's disease, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, out of 100 people with those diseases, 70 or 80 are women. And with some of these autoimmune diseases, the risk for women is 3 to 9 times as great as it is for men. And this is a big medical mystery. But to my mind, it's no mystery at all. Because when I look at the people that develop autoimmune disease, just as for example, they're people who tend to repress their emotions and compulsively look after the emotional needs of others while ignoring their own. Now, under a culture of patriarchy, who are the people that are programmed to do that? It's women. So that during the COVID pandemic, the New York Times had an article called Society's Shock Absorbers, meaning that women took on the role of absorbing not only their own stresses, but also that of their men and of their families. And they felt guilty when their men or families felt stressed, because it's my job to make sure that nobody else is stressed at my own expense. So if you look at something like multiple sclerosis, which is an autoimmune disease where the immune system attacks the nervous system, in the 1930s, the gender ratio was 1-to-1. For each man, there was a woman diagnosed. The gender ratio now is 3.5 women to every man.
Wow.
Which immediately tells us this is not genetic, because genes don't change in a population over 80 years, nor is it the diet or the climate, because that didn't change more for one gender than the other. What has changed? What has changed is that under the patriarchal system, women have been traditionally expected and acculturated and programmed to absorb the stresses of their men and of their families, and to take it upon themselves to be the stress bearers of everybody else. That role continues, but now they also have to make a living and contribute to the economic well-being of the family, so that the stress has doubled. In the meanwhile, there's less support because communities have been torn asunder. There's less contact. People are more isolated. There's more loneliness. So when you have increased stress and less support, of course you expect the disease rate to go up. And this has happened to women in a big way. It's no mystery at all. It's just a function of the fact that when you suppress your emotions and you ignore your own needs, you're hurting your immune system, you're hurting your hormonal apparatus, you're hurting your neurological apparatus, because the mind and body can't be separated. So what they consider to be this big medical mystery, to my mind, is not no mystery at all. And interesting enough, of course, those women who, like yourself, have learned a lesson somehow that they got to say no, that they can't take on this role of being the automatic caregivers of everybody else, that their own needs matter. Also, they can not only overcome disease, they can stop the progression of disease in many cases, because their body no longer has to suffer the consequence of their automatic self-suppression. Unfortunately, I can tell you, you live in LA, don't you?
Yeah.
I know of a rheumatologist at UCLA who read When the Body Says No and totally changed her practice. And she told me that when she brings up these emotional issues with her clients, they get better, and often she can take them off their medications, but she dare not talk about it with her colleagues for fear of ostracization. So I interviewed her in the book, but I don't give her name because she wanted to be anonymous for fear of rejection by her colleagues, even though her clinical experience teaches her the truth of what I'm talking about. It's that bad.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's really bad the way that the system is, the way that people think. It's like, I'm so happy you're saying this. I mean, I've got so much going on in my mind right now as you speak. I'm so happy you're saying this because I was just, as I was mentioning the other interview that I did, where I was being interviewed this morning, the lady I was speaking, because I was telling her what was happening in my body as a result of my emotions and the fact that I absorbed everybody's emotions and energy, and I suppressed them or repressed them. And so I was saying that, and this happens, I'm sure, to a lot of other people, and that's my mission, is to tell this to people. And she said, but have you got clinical proof of this? This is what she said. She said, have you got clinical proof of what you're saying? So I said, I'm not a scientist or a medical profession. I don't have clinical proof. I just have my experience. But I immediately gave her your name. I said, look up Dr. Gabor Maté. He is a clinician, and he will give you years of research on this. So I told her immediately. So that's why I love the work you're doing, because it speaks directly to my heart. And I want to ask you, what got you, can you tell me a little bit about your beginnings and your childhood and what got you into this line of work?
So I would say there are two streams that brought me to this kind of awareness. One is that I suffered my own trauma in infancy, and it was in midlife, I was in my 40s, when I realized how deep those traumatic imprints were and what havoc they were wreaking with my personal life, with my relationship to my work, my relationship to my wife and to my children, and so on. I started working on my own traumatic beginnings and traumatic imprints. At the same time, as a physician in family practice, and I delivered a lot of babies, I also worked in palliative care, looking after dying people. I began to notice that who got sick and who didn't wasn't accidental. And that in each case of chronic illness, in almost each case of chronic illness, not in each case, but in almost every case of chronic illness, I was looking at the imprint of childhood and lifelong stress. So I had to start. What I didn't know, Anita, is that there was a whole scientific literature that have explored those connections and have demonstrated it and documented it, because nobody in medical school talks about this. So I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was writing When the Body Says No, I went to the cancer agency in British Columbia, which is the provincial cancer treatment facility, and I went to the psychology department, the head of the psychology department. And I said, I'm working on this theory that there's a real relationship between stress and cancer. She said, we don't buy that hypothesis around here. This is a psychologist. I went up to the library in the same building, and there were thousands of research papers showing the relationship, thousands, maybe I'm exaggerating, hundreds of research papers showing the relationship between stress and cancer. They worked in the same building. They had no idea of the information in their own library.
Wow. Wow. The left hand doesn't speak to the right hand. It's incredible that people still don't get that relationship. They still don't get that cancer doesn't just happen in a vacuum. You're not just a random victim of bad luck who got cancer. It's so interesting that people don't get it. Again, just the other day, I was speaking to a woman who was telling me about a friend of hers, a man, who was going through a really bad, he was suffering, he was dealing with cancer, but he was really, really suffering with the treatments. The treatments were grueling for him and making him feel much worse. And so she was just saying to me, like, please extend your well wishes to him. So right away, I said to her that there is this wonderful cancer healing institute here in California, in Irvine, called the Center for New Medicine, where they treat all kinds of things, not just cancer, but all kinds of things, hormonal imbalances, but they specialize in cancer treatment. And I was telling her about it, where they use minimal chemotherapy, but they actually get to the root of the disease. And I was explaining to her what they do. And they're a fantastic institute. I mean, I've been there for other reasons. And when I was telling it to her, I said, I would highly recommend this place to anyone who's dealing with cancer. And if I had to deal with cancer, I would go there. I would not go the conventional route for sure. And her response was, it sounds amazing, but I don't think he's ready for that. He won't accept it. Yeah. And that blew me away, that you can accept putting the, you know, the things in your body that you are right now suffering and in pain with, but you're not ready to accept that there is another way, where they actually speak to you about trauma and they recommend books to you and they change your diet and your lifestyle and they make sure that you have time to release stress and all these things. They help you to change your entire life. But she said, no, he doesn't believe in all of that. He won't be ready for it.
So here's the thing. We live in a consumer society. So we consume everything. We consume goods and foods and products. We also consume health. So when people come to their health, they think they're consumers. And so that they can go to the doctor and shop for the treatment. They don't realize that they can be actually active producers of their own health. You know, because we're not programmed to be active agents in our own lives. We were programmed to be passive recipients. And so there's that attitude on the part of the average person in this society, as I'm sort of a passive recipient and consumer. Then there's the total lack of training in physicians and understanding what the science behind what we're talking about. So you have almost like a collusion between the client and the physician. And of course, to look at trauma, it's painful. Yeah. You have to rethink who you are and who you thought you were. You have to rethink your relationship to your parents. You have to rethink how you've approached your whole life. That's not easy for people. People need a lot of support for that. And a lot of people, without that support, they feel scared to even consider it.
So it's...
I have empathy for people who are afraid to look at themselves, because it takes some courage and also takes support. And most people don't get that support. You happen to have an experience where it happens to 1 in a million, or I don't know how many people have those experiences, but you didn't ask for it specifically, consciously. No. You were just there, and by some grace, you had that experience that utterly changed your understanding of who you were and of the kind of world you're living in. But for most people, it's a much more painstaking, step-by-step, laborious, and challenging process. And you know, I can understand why people have trouble with that, especially when the whole culture doesn't support you doing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you said you went through that in your 40s when you had to reevaluate and look at your life. Was that pretty scary for you?
It was painful and it was difficult. And a lot of me resisted it, you know, because I had to acknowledge that I'm responsible. And human beings will run a million miles away from responsibility. I'd rather just, this part of us, nobody wants to be a victim, but all of us like to feel like victims, so that it's, you know, if I have a fight with my wife, I'd much rather be a victim. Not that I want to be a victim, but if I'm a victim, then it's all her fault, and I don't have to look at what I'm bringing to it, you know? So taking responsibility is very difficult for human beings.
Yeah. See, this makes a lot of sense. Like taking responsibility, it's almost like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you gain control over your life and what you do and who you are. But on the other hand, people are afraid that taking control also means getting the blame for everything that goes wrong in your life. It's your fault it went wrong because you were the only one in charge.
Well, and this is where we have to really be compassionate with ourselves and other people. I don't use the word fault, because most of these dynamics that people pursue that may not be healthy for them, they're unconscious.
Exactly.
They didn't consciously choose them. You never consciously chose to be a people pleaser.
No.
You were programmed that way by your early environment. Even your parents didn't consciously set out to make you a people pleaser. They just followed their own cultural guidance. So it's unconscious on everybody's part. That's why I don't use the word fault. Now, on the other hand, while we don't want to blame anybody, we also have to say to people, you may not be at fault, but you're the only one that can take responsibility. Nobody else can. It's kind of a balance. You're responsible, but you're not at fault.
Exactly. Yeah, nobody's saying it's your fault. And you're right. And we do have to be really compassionate and kind with ourselves. And I love how you depicted my story. And I'm aware that my parents were doing the best they could because they wanted me to fit into the culture that I was in. And it's a culture where women are repressed, where women are looked after. First, you're somebody's daughter. And also, if you have brothers, your brothers have more power and autonomy than you do. Yeah. And then you're handed straight to the husband, where women are not allowed to move out of their parents' house, no matter how old they are. And then the husband is seen as the person who looks after them. And a woman is her worth is measured by how valuable she is to the men in her community. And that's the culture I grew up in.
That's right. That's right. I imagine that as you underwent your own transformation, you had to really re-educate your husband. I know that my wife has re-educated me quite a bit. She, in fact, 5 years ago, she said to me, listen, buddy, you've written a book called When the Body Says No. Now you better write one called When the Wife Says No. It's a question. The question for the men is, are they willing to be educated?
Yeah, I was especially blessed. Honestly, I believe that if I had a different kind of husband, I would not have come back. I would have stayed on the other side. And I have mentioned this, that, originally my parents had arranged a marriage for me. Yeah. And I believe that had I gone through with the arranged marriage, so anyway, I didn't. I ran away from that. But had I gone through with the arranged marriage, I would have still got cancer. But I think I would have crossed over. I would not have come back. And I know the reason I came back was because I knew that my husband would actually support this journey. I knew that he would. I just had to be vocal and be unafraid to express myself. But I knew that he was completely open to being educated to who I really am and who my soul intended for me to be. And that person had been repressed for years and years.
Well, talk about a soulmate, eh?
Yeah.
Somebody who didn't want your personality, they wanted your soul.
Yeah, we have a soul connection, Danny and I. He has accepted me 110% for who I am. And so it's been an incredible journey, And something that I haven't often mentioned also is that when I had the arranged marriage, during the time that I was engaged to my fiance, my potential partner, and this was an arranged one, not necessarily a situation I wanted to be in, but I was doing it to fit into my culture, my society, to be accepted by my parents. My body developed an ovarian cyst at that time. Yeah. It was benign and I had it removed, but the cyst removed. But it's just interesting. At that time, I didn't see the correlation with being me complying with something that I didn't want to do.
Yeah. Well, the body does say no, doesn't it? And the question is, can we learn to listen to the body before we get sick, or do we need a disease to wake us up?
And that's, and that's funny because in different ways, your message and mine and your mission and mine are so similar.
Absolutely.
So similar. I won't share everything I share because I don't want people to have to go through what I went through. I really don't. They need to know their soul came here for a purpose, and they need to express that no matter what.
I'm just shaking my head because there's nothing I can add to that. It's absolutely how I see it.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and it's almost, there's something in us that wants us to be authentic more than it wants us to survive.
Yes, exactly.
You know?
And if we can get that survival voice out of the way and allow the authentic to express itself, we would realize that we wouldn't just be surviving, but we'd be thriving.
We'd be living,
We'd be living, exactly. I am so happy you're in the world, and I'm so happy you're in the world the same time as I am, because I can tell people who say to me, but I want clinical proof, I can say, go look up Dr. Gabor Maté.
In his book, I cite so many studies, and by the way, the number of studies I cite is only the tip of the iceberg. When I first wrote this book, this is a long book, it's 500 pages.
I know, it's huge.
Plus 70 pages of notes. When I first wrote it, it was double this length. Because I wanted to put in, I want to throw in everything but the kitchen sink, all the proof, because I wanted to prove everything to everybody. And then I realized, no, my message is more important than proving every single point. But even the research I cite in this book is only the tip of the iceberg of the science that is behind it.
Wow. Yeah, it's important you put it out there. It is a very thick book. But it's a wonderful book. It's a beautiful book, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in this topic. I highly recommend watching Dr. Maté's videos, his YouTube videos, and just following him. And I want to ask you before we go, is there anything more you'd like to add for our viewers and listeners? And I think we have over 1,600 people tuned in, don't we? That's really great. That's amazing. And more people will watch it once we post it as well. So, yes. So tell us anything else you'd like to add.
It's only that what I've come to realize is that there's an intense healing drive inside all of us. We may become disconnected from it, but we need to learn to trust it. And if we approach ourselves with compassion and some curiosity about why we do what we do, a lot of answers will be revealed to us. That trauma leaves some serious imprints, but the good news about trauma is not what happened to us. Trauma is what happened inside of us as a result of what happened to us. Trauma is the wound that we sustained. That's good news, because if my trauma was what happened to me in infancy, that's over. That was 77 years ago. Nothing I can do about it. But if the trauma was the wound that I sustained, that wound in all of us can be healed at any time. That's my fundamental message, is that difficult as this is, it's actually available to all of us.
Wow, that's beautifully said. And that's so positive and uplifting, that trauma can be healed. It can be healed. And that's the fundamental message, that when you're in charge of your own health, your own life, your own body, you can actually reverse anything. You can heal anything. And remember, I came back from end-stage cancer where I was actually gone, and I still came back. So everything is healable. And I also want everyone to know that your book is available on Amazon and everywhere where books are sold. So I highly recommend that everyone get a copy.
It's already a bestseller on Amazon, and somebody asked if it's going to be available in Dutch. This book is going to be published in 25 languages, including in Dutch, including Romanian, Chinese, Korean. So a lot of people, Arabic. So it'll be available sooner or later in many, many languages as well. But right now it's available in English. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
Oh, gosh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for being on my Instagram. And I'm going to be seeing you on Monday at an event. So, and even though we've spoken many times, we've spoken on the phone, we've spoken on Hay House Radio. And now Monday will be the first time we'll be meeting face to face.
I really look forward.
I'm really looking forward to it too. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And please follow Gabor Maté, follow me, and check out all his videos. Thank you so much, and see you all soon. Bye.